So I was planning on talking about Beto today, and I put out a Twitter poll actually that said that my audience wants to hear me talk about Beto. Unfortunately, something came up, and I'm going to have to put Beto off until next Thursday. Rest easy, I am still planning on taking my swing at Beto O'Rourke. Now, I won't be talking directly about the Christchurch shooting because most everybody has formed their own opinion on it. But I do want to take some time and talk about the event that happened in the news shortly before, in fact only by a couple of days, and the fact that this news story was completely forgotten as soon as the Christchurch shooting happened. Now I want to go on record first and say that I don't believe that the Christchurch shooting was manufactured. Trust me, if the shooting was manufactured in order to keep the news from talking about Nancy Pelosi's bid that she's not going to pursue impeachment, it would have happened on our soil. But we do have to keep in mind the mantra of the Democrat Party, especially over the last couple of years, of never let a good tragedy go to waste. Now, shortly before the Christchurch shooting happened, Nancy Pelosi came out to the Washington Post and confirmed the fact that she does not plan on pursuing any sort of impeachment proceedings against the president, much to the shock of many members of her own party, especially this fresh young face who had an ambitious statement when she first got into office.
People love you and you win. Woo! And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I said, baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
And in solidarity with Representative Tlaib, other Democrats like Al Green and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have also come out on the record and said that they will do whatever it takes and fight life and limb to make sure that this impeachment proceeding gets to the floor of the House so they can vote on it and proceed with removing the president from office. Now, obviously, as soon as the midterm election was over and as soon as the speakership fell firmly back into Representative Pelosi's hand, impeachment has been something that's been talked about by people on both sides of the media. Sean Hannity was very famous going into the 2018 midterms in saying the fact that if we give the speakership back to Pelosi, that's all that she's going to do tirelessly is try to get the president impeached. And in fact, there was some assumption among all House Democrats as soon as they took control of the House of Representatives that this was going to be the first thing that they did day one, as we heard from Representative Rashida Tlaib earlier in the video. But Pelosi has actually been very lukewarm to the idea of pursuing the impeachment. It would be completely dishonest for us to look at Nancy Pelosi's statement and forget about the fact that she did add the qualifier to it. In the statement, Pelosi said that she would not be pursuing impeachment unless there was a massive bipartisan support to remove the president from office. And I think that's important as we look into the reasons that she's doing this and what she hopes the end result will be. Now, the mainstream media has actually been very adamant to the fact that an impeachment is not actually a removal from office. Instead, it is the first step to get an elected official removed from his office on the federal level. But introducing the articles of impeachment is not automatically going to remove Donald Trump from office. Impeachment is a very long-form investigation into an elected official. Sometimes it can take years for any sort of investigation like this to come to its fruition and result in a trial over in the Senate in which 2/3 of members of the Senate would need to be on board in order to remove the president. In addition to being very long form, impeachment proceedings do have the potential to be a very costly exercise. The House of Representatives does control the budget and the spending of the government, and if they feel so strongly about an elected official that they would go down that route, it seems that they would throw every resource that they have into doing so. Now, the Mueller probe may actually be a fast track to get to the end of the impeachment proceedings, and God knows they've already dumped countless numbers of dollars into this probe that still has netted nothing and still doesn't come out. But an impeachment proceeding could very easily move beyond the 2020 election, and I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi, if she did want to try and do something like this, would want to see whether or not Trump could get reelected for 2020 or not, because if he doesn't, then they would just be throwing a lot of money into this for absolutely nothing. Now, if you are going to put this kind of time and treasure into a process like impeachment, you do have an intended result. You don't want to spend all of the media coverage and all of the time that you have unless you are definitively ready to remove an elected official from office. And there's definitely a process that goes along with that. After the impeachment is done, there is a trial that is held in the Senate. After the trial is done, the Senate will take a vote, and it requires a 2/3 majority in the Senate, not just a 60-vote supermajority, but an actual 67-vote majority of 2/3 in the Senate to remove that elected official from office. It's the same process to override a presidential veto. And we're looking at something like this right now, where our president did use his first veto in this Congress that he has sitting in front of him, and it's very likely that no matter what comes out of the veto, they're not going to get the votes scraped together in order to overturn the president's decision to veto the bill that would have ended his national emergency. And I look the same way at the political field that's in the Senate right now. And I look the exact same way at the political field in the Senate right now. And I don't think that no matter what the results of the trial are, unless there is some sort of massive smoking gun that the Mueller report has that I'm sure that they would have brought out already if they actually had, I don't think the Senate can scrape together the 67 votes to make this happen. And I think Nancy Pelosi definitely knows that. I mentioned in a previous video that the House of Representatives was intended to be the more rowdy chamber of Congress. And with that in mind, you are definitely going to see many more ideologically driven members of the House of Representatives than you would see in a Senate. And with that in mind, you really start to see the political divide that is going to come within the Democrat Party, especially when it surrounds this issue. Pelosi and many of her friends don't believe that it's politically advisable to bring impeachment to the floor against the president, especially closing in on the 2020 presidential election, and especially knowing the fact that you can't push this through the Senate. It's just not going to happen unless there is something major that Bob Mueller will not bring to the table. And again, I don't know why he wouldn't do that if the gun was there. The intent was to get Trump out of office as quickly as possible. But still, you have your Cortezes and your Omars and your Tlaibs and your Al Greens that just want to make sure that this happens no matter what, because everybody from the GOP needs to disappear from Congress, and they're not going to stop at the president. That's the more ideologically driven wing of the party. What you do need to keep in mind is the fact that impeachment is a highly political process, and it was designed to be that way. Impeachment seems to be there in order to keep one person, one group of people, or one political party from gaining too much power in the federal government and trying to use that power against the people that the Founding Fathers were trying to protect from the government. And this is absolutely no different. I've heard studies out there that cite the fact that impeachment was supposed to be used much more often than we use it today. In fact, there have been very few members of the government who have been impeached, but the Founding Fathers may have intended us to have an impeachment every time we have a new Congress, but we can opine on that for days outside of this video. As far as the political aspects of this particular impeachment, we all know right away that Trump has a very faithful base, and it's growing every single day. Sometimes I wonder how, but sometimes I'm very glad to see that. And if we do impeach the president, all that's going to happen is this base is going to harden. They're going to double down on trying to recruit new members and double down on trying to make sure that the president does win going into 2020 and beyond. Furthermore, this does serve to alienate many of the more moderate members of the Democrat Party. Business Democrats, union Democrats, and people who are just generally getting sick of listening to Cortez plastered on the front of the news every single day, spouting off things that she could never possibly achieve in government the way our government was structured, which it was structured on purpose in order to avoid people like that getting to the top and making any of these sweeping authoritarian changes. In all honesty, as far as the impeachment goes, I want them to do it. First of all, if the impeachment investigation starts up right away, I think that's going to accelerate the Mueller probe, and that is something that I am dying to see. I want to see all the results of this, and I want to see what my tax dollars have been doing for the last 2 years. And I'm sure that that's going to be the key piece of evidence that they use if they do want to introduce the articles of impeachment. But beyond that, I mean, right now, the Donald is not guaranteed my vote for 2020. But if the election were held today, he does have my vote. And in all honesty, politically, this entire impeachment process can only benefit Trump. As I said, this is going to harden his base, it's going to alienate the moderates, and realistically, it's going to expose the extremism of many of the further left members of the Democrat Party and bring them out into the open where they can alienate their base even further. As far as whether or not this comes back to the top of the news or we never hear about this again, well, that's just going to depend on what happens in the next 24-hour news cycle. What do you think about the prospects of impeaching the president? Do you want them to come forward with it, or do you just want them to give it all up? I always welcome thoughtful and positive discussion in the comments section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.
You're always there for me in my best hiding place, so now